Welcome, classic rock fans, to the 10 best prog epics ever. Today I want to list the 10 best prog epics from the classic era of prog, with a few contemporary choices thrown in as well. If you're new to this channel, please be sure to click like, subscribe and check that notification bell, as it makes all the difference to that YouTube algorithm. And stick around to the end for a few bonus cuts. Number 10 is Plague of Lifehouse Keepers by Van der Graaf Generator from 1971. Pawn Hearts is a challenging album, there's no doubt about that. It's not for the prog faint of heart. And this title track, of course, is partly coloured by the wonderful guitar work of Robert Fripp, which makes it almost a Crimson curiosity. And like King Crimson, it certainly achieves that same level of mind shaggery, but not as restrained as King Crimson. This track is what I call the Ulysses of progressive rock. It's a rite of passage, in fact. Only a chosen few, a select few, have been brave enough to take it on. It's a fabulous number, lots of musical virtuosity going on there, especially drummer Guy Evans, and Hamill's vocals are impassioned and theatrical, perhaps tearing a leaf out of Peter Gabriel's book there, I suspect. It's a story of a lifehouse keeper, but not just. Of course, it's a study of guilt and struggle with all the calamities a man in his position would face, from the isolation, the tumult, shipwrecks, people dying, running out of Jaffa cakes, the horror. Number 9 is Dream Theater and Octavarium from 2005. This 24-minute epic comes from the album of the same title, where 8 and 5 is a kind of a motif. I think there were 8 studio albums at this point, 5 live albums, 5/8 time signatures used. Even the word Octavarium has 5 syllables, vowels and consonants. I'm probably reaching a bit there. But on the cover, of course, you get this Newton's cradle of 8 steel balls. The idea that it kind of ends as it begins. The narrative concerns a man who said he would never live an ordinary life, but at the end decides he wants to. His logic takes him back to the beginning. It's a remarkable and dense piece, lots of references to 20th century culture and art. It's a real smorgasbord of progness with references to everything from Morrissey to Mighty Mouse. It's a wonderful work that requires numerous listens. 8 listens, in fact. Number 8 is Marillion's Ocean Cloud from 2004. Ocean Cloud is a musical odyssey of oceanic proportions. See what I did there? Of course, it marks a journey made by Don Allen across the ocean. He was the first man to row across the Atlantic Ocean in both directions. But the song focuses primarily on the almost fatal third crossing. I love the way that the band managed to capture this man's psyche in the maelstrom by using just the textures of the music. Almost as if the music somehow represents the tumult, and Hogarth's lyrics beautifully illustrate the psyche of the man. The song begins with the sound of waves and seagulls, and the very gentle guitar phrasing giving us an impression of vulnerability. The mournful first line I really like in this track. He's seen too much of life and there's no going back. And what's wonderful is that this line very much stands alone in isolation, very much like the man himself, allowing the listener to ponder the weight and meaning of it. Don Allen comes across as one of these figures in romantic literature, stood on the hill, contemplating what Edmund Burke would call the sublime and the bloody terrifying. I must admit, I love the line in this song, so the sea is my wife and the sweet ocean cloud is a mistress I'm allowed for now. Very much reminds me of that Leonard Cohen song, Lady Midnight, in which he sings, Lady Midnight, I fear that you grow old, the stars eat your body and the wind makes you cold. There's a desolation in the imagery evoked. Number 7 is Rush and 2112 from 1976. Attention all planets of the Solar Federation, we have assumed control. What a bleak ending to this dystopian sci-fi narrative, very much based on the writings of philosopher Ayn Rand. This narrative concerns a multi-planet society controlled by the Federation of the Red Star. No need for ancient ways or items like electric guitars, which is discovered by these stories' protagonists, and you immediately know it's not going to end well. The idea that music and artistic expression poses a threat, and indeed it does. You need to lock up those bastards. Reminds me a little bit of the Styx album much later on, Mr. Roboto, without the Broadway elements. It's a 7-part suite with Geddy Lee assuming numerous parts, you know, from the protagonist, nemesis priest, the oracle. And he does so with aplomb and conviction, that has to be said. The lyric, "and the meek shall inherit the earth," is quite ironic here, as it's anything but that. A society run by priests that see personal freedom as a threat to the established order. I quite like the fact that Rush resisted the pressure laid upon them from the record company to move away from the direction they were going in with the Necromants and the Caress of Steel album, which didn't do well for them, I believe. This was very much a make-or-break album for them. This number is undoubtedly one of the cherished little gems in the prog canon, and it has many moods are explored, restlessness, questioning, discovery. Franz Fanon famously said that violence is man recreating himself. And this song portrays ignorance and fear as a kind of violent struggle towards self-realisation. Number 6 is the ELP in Tarkus from 1972. Those grandiose keyboard sections serving as rubbing up against Lake's mellifluous vocal, I think, almost providing counterpoint to the description of the battle represented in the frenetic, shrapnel-inducing frenzy of Carl Palmer's drums. The tankadillo manoeuvres its way across the battlefield as represented in the textures of the music. This 21-minute epic track beats both Genesis' Supper's Ready and Yes, Close to the Edge by a year. The idea may sound absurd, but it's very much in the spirit of prog as the band, through the music, attempt to breathe life into this mind-buggering concept. And it's also thoroughly enjoyable as we navigate these surreal landscapes and indeed soundscapes of Tarkus. Interestingly, the Jazz Music Archives describe this number as an unpleasant mishmash of half-baked ideas. But I find this a thrilling and surreal excursion, imaginatively and beautifully evoked by the wonderful keyboard work of Kiefer Emerson, Lake's serene, almost reverential vocals, and of course punctuated by Carl Palmer's percussive flourishes. Number 5 is Genesis and Supper's Ready from 1972, a remarkable conceptual piece, of course divided into 7 sections. It tells the story of 2 lovers who travel to strange worlds, eventually returning to their own world to witness the apocalypse. It's an odd excursion that juxtaposes the ideas of good and evil, employing numerous biblical and literary allusions to keep the beard strokers happy. I never tire of listening to this one. The more you listen to the more nuances and references reveal themselves. It's a blend of instrumental virtuosity, melody and shifts in mood are impressive and certainly keeps the listener on their toes. The music is fast, slow, acoustic, electric folk, balladic, with the obligatory odd time signatures that one expects from a prog opus like this. Willow Farm, of course, begins with a Peter Gabriel proclaiming a flower. The Apocalypse section has the hairs standing up on the back of your neck as Gabriel will stand there all dressed in white holding up a neon light. Live, of course, it would leave the audience astounded, drained and breathless. Peter Gabriel summed up Supper's Ready as almost like a journey through the Book of Revelations. Interestingly, in the book by Amado Gallo, he said that it was influenced by an experience his wife had of sleeping in a purple room and the nightmares it gave her. Number 4 is King Crimson and Starless from 1974, an impressive suite and the final track of the band's 7th studio album, Red. It's an album that evokes an atmosphere of disquiet. One critic has written that Red is a record about fear. Interestingly, Bill Bruford said that, I'm paraphrasing of course, we were all growing weary of each other and this emotional resonance has infected and infused the music on this record. The 5 songs are fiery, anxious and visceral, so Red is probably the most appropriate title for it. Speaking of titles, I think the title Starless and Bible Black is actually lifted from Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood. This song is the swan song for 70s era King Crimson, and John Wetton's vocals are full of not only crushing imagery, but are delivered with the solemnity of a priest atoning a mass. But it's that central guitar motif that sticks with you. In fact, the critic Sam Sodomsky said that it's the same sheet metal bend he later brought to Heroes. It's a stunning piece of work. It's very much up there with Epitaph as far as I'm concerned. If I may quote Sam Sodomsky again, he suggests that Fripp's solo sounds like the mockery of the tedious gymnastics that had come to define prog. In a way, I think Starless is King Crimson's own self-immolation. Wetton's vocals are superb and communicate a sense of weariness, and Mellotron's of course infused the number, but it's Fripp's guitar work that evokes an almost fraught tightrope tension, a delicate balance between madness, sanity, beauty, chaos. This track almost represents an almost malevolent restraint. Number 3 is Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull from 1972, a 40-minute odd epic broken into 2 sections. Had to be because of the restraints of vinyl in those days. Perfect vehicle for Anderson to deliver the mother of all concept albums as a reaction to Aqualung being labelled a concept album. Part of this album, part of it is to kind of lampoon the musical trends of the day, as well as explore the faux narrative of Gerald Bostock, aka Ian Anderson. But I like all the way he explores, if to kind of send them up a bit, some of the prog textures of the day, the musical noodlings that on this album just collapse into a pile of nothingness. Anderson very much feels like the naughty boy in The Emperor's New Clothes who stands there pointing out that the Emperor is indeed in the Altogether. It's not only a wonderful story narrative, lots of twists and turns, but it's, of course it does lampoon the almost fiddly aimlessness of some of the avant-garde textures of music that had been emerging from psychedelia onwards. Barrymore Barlow is immense on this record and makes a massive contribution to the Jethro Tull sound. This is a glorious example of snoop-cocking by Ian Anderson, good-humoured, all wrapped up in this wonderful Pythonesque and scatological humour, a rich tradition of British satirical wit. Number 2 is Pink Floyd's Dogs from 1977, arguably perhaps one of my favourite Floyd numbers of all time. It's a spiky invective against the inequalities of capitalism. This is Waters' Orwellian beast fable, bookended of course by Waters' plaintive mewing, Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and Part 2, which seriously pissed off Gilmour of course. But this album, being a spiky, angry album, it divides many Floyd fans who feel that this record is just not their bag of feed. But Dogs, for me, is a perfect balance of bile and melodicism, and it also contains some of Gilmour's finest guitar work. You get that beautiful guitar phrasing from Gilmour, which is almost a transcendent moment for me. Even Gilmour's warm and mellifluous voice adds some well-needed contrast to the anguished whine of all that strangulated bark of Roger Waters. Wonderful, a beautiful keyboard section by Richard Wright, accompanied by the whines and yowls and barks of numerous hounds. I've read somewhere that this track may well have been influenced by the Allen Ginsberg poem Howl. Nevertheless, it's a gorgeous number, very much defined by that unabated sense of unease. Number 1 for me is Yes and Close to the Edge from 1972. Close to the Edge opens with the ambient nature sounds, which quickly explodes into this heavy bass and psychedelic guitar work by Steve Howe. Very much a nod, a doff of the cap, I think, to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. It appears fractured and cacophonous, but technically quite clever as it segues beautifully into the main melody of the piece. We have to wait to about the 3-minute mark until we get any sense of equilibrium imposing itself. John Anson mentions that this album was very much inspired by the Hermann Hesse book Siddhartha. He said, it's a book about a man trying to understand himself and reality. We did this one album called Close to the Edge. You always come back down to the river. All the rivers come to the same ocean. That was the basic idea. And we made this really beautiful album. You can tell that he was only a year away from doing Topographic Oceans, can't you? Variety of different textures, moods juxtaposed on this one. From the almost funk-based guitarist reverential serene hymnal section, before the main theme or motif sees the close of the number. So there you go, that's my 10 favourite prog epics. And as I said at the beginning, a few bonus prog epics. I'm going to choose some fairly contemporary ones here. First one, of course, is Wobbler by the Banks. I mean, this band are fabulous. They evoke the sound of classic era, yes. That classic era progressive rock, whether you think that's a good thing or not. Definitely a band worth checking out. The other track is Bobel Terang by Solstice. This song is so beautiful to be almost unearthly, in fact. It's from their remarkable album that came out, I think, in January this year. Or was it December last year? Anyway, it's called Light Up. And the next song is Altitude by Lifehouse. This beautiful song about connection, remarkably lifted by the almost Gilmour-esque guitar phrasing of Dave Bainbridge. But you've been watching 10 Best Prog Epics by Classic Album Review. If you've enjoyed this video, do share it. This channel definitely needs to grow, I think. Other than that, hope you're well, you're staying safe, and more importantly that you keep listening.